Hello, I'm Todd Phillips, the editor of Canadian Auto Dealer. Today we're here with David Adams, the president of the Global Automakers of Canada. Yesterday, the Trump administration announced new measures to roll back emission standards for new vehicles. And so it's causing a bit of a stir on both sides of the border. So we thought we'd get a perspective from David Adams. So David, what does this mean for Canada and your members going forward?
Well, thanks very much for having me on again, Todd. I really appreciate it. Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting dynamic that Canada finds itself in now, where certainly our government is committed towards its climate change objectives and certainly a committed party to the Paris Agreement, whereas the U.S. has gone down a different path under Trump. And now we're seeing a situation where the commitments that were made back in 2012 have been tailored such that they're not as aggressive as they were originally. I think the reality is that all of our members, and I think the entire industry, is supportive of making annual, year-over-year improvements in fuel economy, and that just makes common sense given the fact that the entire industry spent probably in excess of $200 billion making vehicles more fuel efficient and also transitioning from internal combustion engine vehicles into, electric and also near zero emission vehicles as well.
Well, some people might think, oh, Canada should just go it alone and create its own policy and just distant from the U.S. one. But there's a world of complexity in terms of engineering and just logistics to even consider that. Can you maybe talk about why it would be so hard for Canada to chart its own path?
Well, sure. And I think what's happened in the past, it's always, well, if you go back to actually the 1960s when the Auto Pact was first signed, that really started to integrate Canada and the US in terms of one North American automotive market, both from a safety standards perspective and from an emission standards perspective. So what we've seen is over the years, Canada and the US becoming increasingly closer from a regulatory perspective. And when this rule was established in 2012, basically Canada, looked at what the U.S. rule was and incorporated actually by reference a lot of the actual U.S. regulations. So at this point, unless Canada does something different and develops its own new regulatory regime, as you suggest, then we are looking at following what the U.S. is doing. And I think whether we follow what the U.S. is doing right now or not, talk about some other standard, I think what the auto industry has been consistent in saying is that what we really need is one federal standard, on a North American basis for the integrated automotive market that's comprised essentially of Canada and the United States at this point.
Well, one thing that's actually causing a bit of a divide is some OEMs are siding with more stricter standards coming out of California, and others are opting for these new standards. So it's not really one position at this stage. It seems that there's a risk that even the automotive OEM community could be split on this, and then you're kind of in a go nowhere situation. So how do you see that playing itself out?
Sure. Well, let me just comment on that. As I said a minute ago, I think the entire industry is consensus on the need for one standard period on a North American basis. Now, I think if you think about that for a minute, the reason why some automakers may be looking at different options is because the situation that we've got ourselves into now with the final rule that's come out in the United States is that there's a lot of regulatory uncertainty right now because you have California and some of the other states launching lawsuits to the extent that this is going to be tied up in court for a while. And like any other business, automakers value certainty almost above all in their business operating environment. And certainly with the current situation with COVID, we don't have a lot of that. But certainly the fact that this could be tied up in court for a while just creates, in some cases, an untenable situation for automakers.
Well, I appreciate taking the time today to walk us through that. I recognize with COVID, it's everybody's focus is just the survival of the industry for sure. It's the number one concern, but it doesn't mean there aren't other issues going on behind the scenes that are going on that need discussion. And I appreciate you having this chat with us today because these are big issues that will affect the industry on the far side of the recovery. And I think we have to spend some of our time looking ahead on these other issues too. So thanks for your time.
Well, one thing, if I could add, Todd, just before we wrap it up, is I think it's important to properly dimension this thing too, because I think, environmentalists or others out there, tend to look at the auto industry and think that we're not doing enough. And I think we really have to separate out what's happening in the new car market vis-a-vis transportation overall. And the government is quick to point out that we're not meeting our overall 30% reduction target by 2030, even as we sit right here, right now. But in terms of looking at strictly the new car market, we've had improvements in fuel economy and GHG emissions reductions of 21% to date from 2005. And the new car sector is actually on track to meet the 30% reduction in GHG emissions by 2030. So I think the real message that we'd like to leave with folks is that, if we're going to solve the transportation problem, we need to look at the whole piece, the whole pie, not just a narrow piece of it, which is the new vehicle sales. So we've had discussions with government, preliminary discussions with government on that, and we're looking for further engagement to see how collectively and collaboratively with government we can make that happen.
Well, again, thanks. Good summary there, David. And again, we'll be reaching out again during this COVID pandemic, as we can't meet in person, but we're still remain connected and make sure that the messages get out there to people in the industry. So thanks for your time today.
Great. Thank you, Todd. Take care.
Signing off.